Welcome, everybody. My name is Camilla Hewitson, and I work with C-Focus, which is delighted to be bringing you this talk series curated by ArtAsiaPacific as part of our C Spotlight program. A big thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. As you know, C-Focus is the anchor event of Singapore Art Week, and we have opened our doors for its 4th edition this week. We are delighted to be showcasing over 170 artworks from 50 artists in 24 galleries. We open to the public from the 15th to the 23rd of January at Tanjong District Park, and tickets are now on sale for $10 for multiple entries. As well as our talks and tours, I wanted to highlight that this year there is a specially curated fringe program at Projector X at Riverside Point screening over 20 compelling artist-made films from the 19th to the 21st of January. But all this information on these exciting events can be found at our website, which is cfocus.sg. And it just leaves me to thank the speakers and to hand over to our moderator this evening, Chloe from Asia Art Pacific. Many thanks.
Thank you, Camilla, and welcome everyone to Pivot to the Future, the Age of Influencers. So this panel takes as its starting point the importance of social media and digital marketing for cultural platforms and the arts industry, especially nowadays during the pandemic when we are seeing notable growth in the number of digital programs and online artwork sales, often to young millennial collectors who are increasingly confident at buying things straight off the internet. In this context, among the most powerful marketers today are individuals who specialize in promoting products to their social media followers. I think you can count all 3 of tonight's panelists among these influencers or people with influence. I'm not sure what their relationships are with this term influencer. Perhaps we'll touch on that later. And together we'll be discussing how they use social media in their work, whether that is devising digital strategies for institutions or creating desire around a certain lifestyle ethos, or casting a spotlight on certain artists and movements. We will also touch on their understandings of what ideas and cultural products get the most traction online, as well as their reflections on the limitations and potentials of social media for building and connecting meaningfully with audiences. So before I jump into introducing the speakers, I just want to encourage viewers to pop in questions into the Q&A box at any point this evening, and we'll address these questions towards the end of the session. So without further ado, joining me is Jiajia from New York, founder and director of the first digital agency for art. As the digital strategist specializing in arts and culture, Jiajia makes museums and cultural organizations more accessible through technology. Before launching her own agency in 2020, she led the Guggenheim Social Media and Digital Marketing as an associate director between 2010 and 2015. And in 2016, she joined the Jewish Museum as the director of digital. Our second speaker is Kevin Poon, a curator, designer, and DJ. He is a consummate networked creative figure, acting as a hub and a filter through his many entrepreneurial projects across the worlds of art, fashion, hospitality, and food. In 2019, he established WOAW Gallery in Hong Kong, which presents artworks by established and emerging artists from around the globe. Last but not least, we have Michael Xufu Huang, founder of X Museum in Beijing, where he oversees programming, development, and promotion, and he's curated shows including the first Asian solo of S.E.A. Outside of X Museum, Michael's curatorial projects include Metal, Wood, Water, Fire, and Earth, a showcase of 5 young women artists from China at Pace Gallery in Palo Alto. He is also a trustee at the New Museum in New York and was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2017. So I thought we could start off our session this evening with the speakers giving us a little bit more detail about what they do and what role social media plays in what they do. So perhaps we could start with Jiajia. Could you tell us about your work as a digital strategist for the art world and what that entails exactly, and how big of a role social media plays within what you do?
Thanks, Chloe, and thank you so much to C-Focus and everyone for joining us today. I'm here from New York, where I'm still waking up. So good morning, good evening to everyone. And though I don't technically identify as an influencer, I'm happy to talk to you about the impact of social media on the art world and how it's completely changed how we see the world in so many ways. I started my career working in museums, and this was the very beginning of social media, where museums were still trying to decide whether or not they would allow visitor photography, this moment of trying to digitize their works to put them online. And here we are now, where social media essentially dictates whether or not you see something. We're completely driven by these, corporate algorithms and determining what impact, the world has in, how you receive information, based on how you engage, based on how exactly you move around the world, and who you listen to, which ultimately dictates your actions. So as a consultant now, outside of the museum world, I now work with institutions as well as galleries and arts organizations and artists. I help advise on how exactly we can navigate social media as a tool within a much larger library of tools online to create a digital presence and really tell an authentic story. There's so much that we essentially have to decode in trying to get these tools and technologies to really work the way in which we can now translate a physical presence into the online world. And this was incredibly important all of last year, the year before, and sort of ongoing. And thinking about how essentially businesses can operate in a digital space, both financially and in some cases, organizations that have entirely translated their practice and activities into just social media. I feel like we're in this really interesting moment where social media has actually been around for quite some time, and we're now moving into this more decentralized space, but we're still talking about a lot of the same questions. So, the internet began with being able to publish online, and then it became interactive in Web 2.0. And now we're in this space of many different people in the art world and the world at large thinking about the blockchain and NFTs, and many of the same questions about whether or not we should participate in this space still exist, which sort of tells you that we haven't learned anything. I think with social media, the turning point for me came when social media started projecting these very immersive environments that happened primarily within museum spaces, where we began to see people flocking to very immersive experiences and installations like a James Turrell or Yayoi Kusama Infinity Mirror Room. And these spaces essentially were replicated now in these more intentional environments that we see with collectives like Team Lab and dedicated spaces that have emerged like Super Blue that are completely meant to cater to those experiences, demonstrating that social media actually motivates people to do something and go somewhere, which sort of counters the original fallacy of the fact that people thought that if you put something online, people wouldn't visit anymore. But for me, the question that I always think about is, what is the impact of social media determining how we see and how it determines perhaps the future of art history? If you think about images that live online, now that we live in this Google worldview and now Instagram worldview, if you search for something and all the images that come up are a very specific era of someone's work, just because of the impact of the shareability on social media, and particularly Instagram, does that dictate how we see an artist for the future? So the premise of accessibility has definitely turned into something that I think can really skew the way culture moves. And ultimately, I think about how so much of this is at the mercy of these companies. So last year, Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram, determined we're now going to be a video platform. And obviously, in competing with TikTok, you have an entire platform now trying to pivot to video as well. So here we are trying to, change all of our strategies and change how we perform on these spaces, given one specific decision that a platform has made. I also think about the echo chamber that's created around the ways in which we engage with content and how it, fundamentally divides how people receive and consume content. But then the larger kind of more geopolitical ecosystem that exists with different countries and how different users experience the internet. The internet we see in the West is completely different than the internet that most people see online in China. So how do we grapple with how we receive that information, and how can organizations think about, you know, sort of a much longer intentional impact of creating a presence online?
Yeah, certainly a lot of ideas there that we can revisit throughout the session. But before that, I was also curious to hear from Kevin. Do any of these concerns resonate with you as a founder of a gallery? And could you tell us a bit about, you know, the background of the gallery, how you came to deciding to establish it, and also what's interesting about what you do is, you know, the gallery is one part of, you know, an umbrella of companies to do with lifestyle, food, fashion, music, etc. So how does the gallery fit into this larger umbrella? And how does social media function across these different businesses?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you, C-Focus, and thank you, Jiajia. I think she pretty much encapsulated the whole conversation and summed it up better than I could. So that was super awesome. Yeah, so I mean, just because of COVID, since 2019, we haven't really been able to travel freely, at least not in Hong Kong. So the idea was, you know, I used to be traveling to all these art fairs and seeing all this amazing art and going with my friends and stuff. And all of a sudden we're on this travel hiatus. So then the idea was to bring the art to us. And that was kind of sort of how we got started, really. Yeah, and we started off with a small art show, and people really resonated with that. And then one thing kind of organically led to another. And so, yeah, so there we have it. Yeah.
So,
but I think it's really interesting. I mean, in this topic of this, you know, and for this particular panel talking about Instagram and art, I just think that it's so amazing how so much stuff really happens online, you know, like on a daily basis. If I can't travel, then I would talk to artists online, or, you know, we would find out about new collectors online, or people would see our shows virtually. We have this thing called Matterport, which if you can't really actually get there, it gives you like a 3D kind of vibe of the gallery, so that you can see everything really before you actually set foot there. So yeah, it's been a magical time. And now, you know, we're all talking about Web3. So what does that look like? Well, is there a gallery in the metaverse? You know, these are all questions that we're talking about daily, and it's interesting to see everyone's perspective on it.
right. I'm curious if you know, in devising the programming of your gallery or as a collector yourself, how you learn about certain artists, or if you use social media as a tool to understand someone and their practice.
I think so. I mean, definitely to Jiajia's point, it's the democratization of art, right? So from before, it might be a very exclusive situation where you might have to go to a gallery and you might have to make an appointment, and, you know, they may or may not have time to see you. And then, you know, it's the art is closed up in that sense. But with Instagram, you know, I think there's a bigger interest in art too, because you know, that art makes people happy and seeing it, and it's part of the culture. And with Instagram, you can kind of, or whatever social media platform that you're on, basically you can see everything and you can interact, and everyone has a voice. You know, everyone has their page and they can showcase their best work for artists, and collectors can then say, oh, these are the stuff that I'm collecting, please consider me. And so it's kind of like a platform where people can, yeah, it's like a very fun place.
Do any of these ideas chime with you, Michael, or practices? Do you also scroll through social media to understand certain artists or how you might move forward with your programming at the X Museum.
Hi guys, this is Michael. Thanks for having me, and nice to see Jiajia and KP. I haven't seen you guys for so long. Yeah, and yeah, and I have to say, actually, I think Jiajia is like one of the first person that really inspired me to like post on Instagram. Like, I think when I was studying in the US, and like she's one of the first that posted pictures of like shows and her in cool outfits with the shows, and yeah, so I think gave me a lot of inspiration, and we later on we actually became friends, and we meet at some like previews and events, and I think she's really doing a great job on digital kind of initiatives for the arts, and yeah, and I think I agree with a lot of the points said. I think as a young like millennial collector, I always find out a lot of information on Instagram, and I think also for artists is a good way for them to be discovered. Even if they don't have a show right now, they still have a chance to to be seen. And also I guess also it's also good for young collectors, because before I think the collectors tend to be older, and they have been in the art world for a long time. And I think because of Instagram, that also give a lot of like young collectors a chance to kind of showcase their taste or their kind of what they do and their collection, and to be known by the galleries faster. So I think that's something I cherish with the internet culture. And also I think in some ways I think Instagram or the internet culture really affected art and how artists is making works. And also I guess is a part of our history now, with the waves of for example Malay women who made art on Instagram, and all these artists today who paint in this kind of more internet friendly aesthetic. I think especially during COVID now, because we consume more art on the screens than in person. So they really have to incorporate like aesthetics that can stand out on a phone screen. So I think this is like a big topic that's gonna really change a lot of aesthetics for the artists, and also for young people who are born in this age of internet. Also, I think like I was talking to this artist a few months ago, and he was basically locked in this studio to make work and have no contact, like no phones, nothing, just to make work. And it's very interesting what he said after he came out. He said, oh, like before he never noticed how like bright and how these like your phone screens are, and also how noisy and colorful these advertising on the streets are. So I think at today, or this age of internet and like fast information, like you really have to really put a lot of like noise and like very eye-catching colors and forms to really catch people's eyes. So I think that's also something that social media and the internet is doing to us. Like you need to like be seen.
Yeah. So given the fundamental impacts of social media on aesthetics and what is visible, with this idea that you have a more open, theoretically more egalitarian platform that anyone can access, actually, if we look closer, not all content is created equal. And this is something that Jiajia, you hinted at as well. Certain content gets more traction, and it's kind of at the mercy of these algorithms that are designed by companies in the Silicon Valley. And I think how social media works is really opaque to most people. I mean, you have a kind of like breakdown maybe of like how many clicks you get on a certain post, but how do you predict what will do well or not well? Do you have any insights? Does anyone here have any insights into that, or how we can navigate that kind of opacity?
I get this question all the time, and sometimes I know the answer and sometimes I don't, because you're absolutely right, Chloe. It's something that is often unpredictable and is a sea change, based on a single person's decision. I think something that people often lose sight of is the social nature of social media. And at the end of the day, Michael made some great points about images that stand out. There's definitely a formula in the images that we interact with all the time on Instagram, but also in the real world that connects us as humans. So if you think about some of the characteristics that Michael talked about, things that are really colorful, and often it's images with people. So if you go to your Explore tab on Instagram, it's all images of people. Whereas galleries tend to just post stark images of installation views with no people. So there's a clear correlation of, what ends up getting more engagement. At the same time, people really need to understand that the whole experience of art is also social. We go to museums, we go to galleries with our friends to have conversations about art. And people also want to connect with others on social media. So what one used to do online by just putting images online doesn't work for social media, because you need to have that human-centric element. So I often advise, whether it's a gallery or a museum, that you really need to really think about potentially even user-generated content. How are people experiencing the space that you create online, and what are their impressions and interactions? The other big shift that's happening, of course, is video. So, Instagram started as a photo sharing platform, but now you can see these gradual changes in the UX that are influenced by the fact that now Instagram has introduced Reels, and years ago introduced Stories. The workflow of many organizations and artists and creators now has to change, because you now are shifting into this entirely different content creation workflow, and now have to create these snappy 1-minute videos that really get seen for about a 24-hour cycle and they disappear. So there's a lot of impact that happens, but people, whether you choose to be authentic to who you are and share what you want to do, ultimately my assumption is that by being on social media, you want to have that awareness and broader reach too. So there's a very careful balance of how you determine how you want to integrate some of those practices into how you present yourself.
Yeah, you mentioned human-centric. So how exactly would that play out if taking into consideration, the differences in the nature of your audience as individuals and not as data sets? How would that look in terms of social media content creation?
Yeah, I mean, Michael said it first. He started following people on Instagram, right? I think people want to follow other people and not, galleries or companies or institutions. So it's really important to foreground the experiences of people in your space, people as in the artists that you're representing. Usually, content that you see online that is very stark, that is like an empty gallery space, isn't really going to translate the experience of connection and interaction that you are looking for when you're on social media. So, on a very superficial level, just including people in some of your content.
So this is something else that you brought up, which is that social media works differently in different places, or the influence of social media on visual culture plays out differently in different places. And this is something that maybe Michael, you can chime in on, because X Museum is on Instagram and Facebook, but it's also on platforms that are more specific to China or more popular to Chinese audiences, like WeChat, Bilibili, Weibo. things like this. So how do the two kind of different ecosystems of social media platforms compare?
I think we have like very different strategy for different platforms. I think on WeChat is kind of like a newsletter. Like no one use like emails that much in China. So by subscribing to these, official accounts of museums, it's kind of like subscribing to a newsletter of the museum. So for that, we're just more publishing news. And for things like Weibo is also like Chinese Twitter. So it's the same, like we publish kind of news is more like a short text with images. And Instagram, I guess, similar to everyone. I think it's more to showcase, images that attracts people that we have at the museum, like either artworks we're showing or installation shots or, related content of the museum. So yeah, I think, today there's so many opportunities in the social media world. We haven't even tapped into TikTok, but I think it's starting to. A lot of museums are trying to make interesting like short films or TikTok. Yeah, I think I think different platforms like users have different habits of how they consume information. So we're just trying to find ways to promote our information to as many people as we can by complying to the habits of different social media platforms. Also, I think our website is also, when we launched it during COVID, is like, a lot of people tried it. It's kind of like web 4.0 kind of website that's like a game. So as Jiajia said, like, I don't think we're doing this kind of online content to affect people traveling to the museum. It's very different. I think it's more people have better perceptions of the museum, and by interacting with the museum in a different way, they can learn more about the museum. And and I think even our website is kind of like New Life 3D, but it's more not like replacing the physical installation. It's more kind of we're making it into a new dimension of space that people try as like a supplement to our exhibition or to our information. Like instead of having like a flat website that's just have text and images, we have like an interactive website.
Yeah, I'm also interested in how so the influence of a social media influencer can be manifest differently across the globe. So in China, you have this term Wang Hong, so internet famous. So maybe Michael, you can probably explain this better than I can. But it's the idea of certain people, posting maybe their visit to a cafe or a museum or an artwork, and that kind of gaining a lot of traction, and then other people visiting the same spot to take photos, etc. And Jiajia, you also spoke to this with certain artworks being catered to these kind of photo op moments. And so I was wondering, what are some of the other kind of visible outcomes or impacts of influencer culture on arts and culture? Or another way of phrasing this is, what is the work of an influencer geared towards?
Sorry, who's the question to?
Maybe Michael, you could also, I don't know how good my explanation of the Wang Hong phenomenon was.
I think Wang Hong is like KOL. I don't know if KOL is a term in the Western world, like key opinion leaders. So they're just kind of like, they're not a celebrity, but they have a lot of following online, and maybe they're known for their style or their lifestyle or beauty or whatever. So yeah, I think there's a big culture here in China. From a museum standpoint, like I think unlike a lot of Western institutions, we actually, every time we open an exhibition, we have a budget for KOLs just to invite a lot of them to come and take pictures and promote the show on their channels. So it's not only traditional like media and newspaper we actually we really value the culture of, KOLs in China. And I think, yeah.
Is this something specific to China? I mean, Jiajia, maybe you can speak to how that plays out in the US. Is there a similar kind of phenomenon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in recent years, social media influencers have sort of equated to becoming, people that the media have interpreted as people who are as influential in getting the word out. So traditionally, when you are promoting an exhibition, you would reach out to journalists, you would buy paid advertising placements, whether it's in a newspaper, an online ad, the subway, and now included within the mix is, trying to reach out to these people in your community to both build community, but then also obviously reach the people who follow them. So years ago, when I was at the Guggenheim, we started doing Insta-meets, very similar to what Michael was describing. So in conjunction with our openings, we would also have the press preview that would be for people from like the New York Times and like New York Magazine, but then you would have a separate Insta-meet allowing for people in the social media community to have first access and beautiful, shots of your new shows or installations, to have that exclusive access. I think the economy around influencers is also something that's still a bit gray, I would say, to a lot of people in the art world, because there are certainly people who are compensated for allowing content to reach their audience. But I think for institutions more so, it's more about this earned relationship, inviting people to be part of your environment and giving them access in the way that you would give journalists access to your exhibitions in your space.
Yeah, I think that kind of also raises or comes back to this issue of exclusivity. So perhaps a social media network reflecting, a real life community of people. And you kind of see this a lot with NFTs, a lot of the popular NFTs being avatars, like, the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and people using those NFTs that they purchased as their icons on Instagram, etc. And that being a very literal kind of signifier of like, I have access to a certain social network. And, coming back to that issue of how much can social media really help expand one's social network, and expanding one's audience offline and online. Is there anyone who would like to speak to this?
It's interesting. I heard you say social net worth, or was it network? It's an interesting thing to kind of conflate, because I think there's also a fallacy around audience that has been created around, being able to accumulate a large following. So just because someone has like millions of followers does that mean their art is any good? Does that mean their art is going to perform as well in the art market? Does that mean the longevity of their career is guaranteed? Like, none of those questions actually translate. So there's a whole visual economy that's been created around social media that we've sort of fabricated, and given cultural influence. So there's this perception, I think, when people have a large audience online, that there is, again, comparing social media to traditional media, this, media value of impressions and being able to reach a large audience of people that you normally wouldn't. But then I think we also falsely equate another type of relevance, just given the reach, and with that is like this whole other complicated economy around, the way in which influencers operate online, the way in which social media companies operate as a business in the form of advertising, collecting data from everyone, using this free product to essentially sell it back to you to reach more people. So the notion of net worth is also very complicated here.
Yeah, Kevin, could you maybe speak to that as your experience as, a gallery owner who represents or promotes certain artworks by certain artists? Is the size of the audience important?
I mean, I think it's debatable, but for me, I don't really use social media maybe in that sense where I'm like thinking about like all the analytics behind it or the impressions. I think you have to have a narrative and a story about maybe what you're trying to say, or I think that really being authentic is important, and not really just trying to think about how many people are going to click in or how many people are going to see that, or if that translates to sales. I think if you're putting out good stuff and you're just wanting to share good stuff, I think that translates to whatever that you might be manifesting. So I think it's all really about energy and momentum. And, I think having a story and having a point of view is important. I mean, obviously there's a whole underbelly of an economy of social media and like how that plays out. But for me, I think the most important thing is to have your own voice and to have your own perspective and not be drowned out by influencers telling you, oh, this is the good art or this is bad art. You should just, take all that information in and then formulate an opinion on your own.
Okay.
So in that sense, I mean, I feel like sometimes people can get lost in social media and on the flip, I mean, I think it's good to be involved, but at the same time, don't get lost in it.
Yeah. So, Jiajia, I know you said that you don't think of yourself as an influencer, but you have amassed a significant following on social media, and same for Michael. As individuals, you definitely have audiences, large audiences. So what are your approaches or philosophies when it comes to what you share and how you use your platforms?
I also wanted to follow on something I just thought of after Kevin's comment. I guess for me personally, I don't really have a strategy for my own personal social media. I've just been sharing images of my life, and that's been like what I do. It's like a visual diary. Before social media, what?
That's the best way, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's storytelling, and I think the authenticity is certainly something I look for when I follow people online too. But the other thing I thought of when we're talking about these ways of like optimizing social media, and like the ways in which a lot of other people outside of the art world use social media, it's so different in the art world, because art, we're talking about art, we're not talking about like t-shirts, we're not in the fashion industry where there's like a very automatic conversion from like interaction to sale. Art is also something that is so multidimensional, and so in the same way that you might see like, okay, it's like really easy to translate fashion and publishing and cinema onto the internet. There's Netflix or Spotify, there's Amazon, but art could be a painting, art could be a photograph, art could be something on the internet, could be a code base, it could be a 4-channel video installation. There's so many different ways of experiencing art, and so much of it is also experiential that you can't kind of entirely encapsulate anything art related on social media, whether it's criticism, whether it's like trying to like determine like whether or not you want to represent an artist online. It's such a one-dimensional view of what one experiences in the art world, and I think that's why, unlike other industries, we have this phenomenon of people wanting to go to physical places even more when they see something online. So it's completely different from all the different ways that I think we experience other forms of culture.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I think, sometimes when I discover new artists, I don't want to share until later, because, once you share, everyone kind of jumps in on it. So I think there's also sharing and not sharing, and how each person balances that is also up to them, I think.
Michael, do any of these ideas resonate with you?
I think it's similar to Jiajia. I just kind of share my life and pictures where I look good. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know. I don't have much to add on this question.
We have a perhaps kind of related question from the audience. Someone is asking, can you make a living just as an influencer in the art world, like in other industries, for example, fashion or music? I mean, Jiajia, you kind of hinted at this a little bit. There being a distinctively different nature to the visual art industry.
I personally don't know anyone who exclusively lives on by just posting stuff on social media. I'm sure those people exist. But I would say, the influencer that we know, that we define as influencer, is most likely going to be someone from some type of crossover industry. So if you, even if you like art, you're probably also doing partnerships with people in fashion, with brands. Those are the places that do place more financial value on partnerships. I think in the art world, it's more about, I think it's a different kind of influence. Honestly, meme criticism is now even more impactful than an art form, right? How many followers does Jerry Gagosian have versus art form circulation? So I feel like there's a different kind of influence that's more about adapting to the current, I guess, zeitgeist of how people talk about art, but it's incomplete representation that can't really replace the industry. You still need to have all these different players working together. You need museums, galleries, publications, and now memes and social media are just another dimension of how we all operate.
Yeah, that is something that I've thought about as an editor at an art magazine. Certainly art criticism is still here, but as you said, you do have certain voices who are perhaps morphing to take into consideration these kind of other voices from influencers, for example, or just the fact that there are more people who can voice their opinions online. So, okay, perhaps we can start addressing questions from the audience. I have another question. So this person is saying, I'm so inspired by your Instagram accounts and what you do, but I wonder whose Instagram you follow, especially for Southeast Asian art or as a Southeast Asian cultural influencer. Who should we definitely be following, or is that space not yet filled?
For me, I follow Diana Campbell because I think Dhaka Art Summit. She's the director of Dhaka Art Summit, and yeah, I think I really value their work and their curations on things. So yeah, that's my answer.
I'll be a brown noser and say ArtAsiaPacific. I honestly can't think of, I can definitely think of individual curators, but I think people on Instagram are a very different breed, even if people are very influential on, in the physical world, they might not be super active online, but for the region, I look to your publication to see what's going on.
Kevin, anyone?
I like Juxtapoz Magazine Instagram, and I like Sasha. I think he does a really great job, discovering new emerging talent, and it's always interesting to see what he's looking at. And actually, there's so many different people that I can't think of off the top of my head, but check on my page all the people that I'm following. That could be like the initial lead. But I'm definitely following Jiajia and Michael, and been following.
What distinguishes these voices for you guys?
Sorry?
What distinguishes these voices of these people who you follow?
The voices?
Yeah, or what draws you to them about their stories that they tell?
I mean, it's almost like getting in a perspective, like I think the art world is already a small place. So it's like almost like if you follow, I don't know, it's just getting a perspective. Maybe this person lives in New York, or maybe this person lives, in Beijing. And then if you follow people around the world, then you kind of get a worldview of what people are into or what people are looking at. And it's interesting. But I don't know. It's hard to, there's no cheat code to like how to, this feels almost like a master class on like art Instagram. But I think there's no set rules. That's, I think the takeaway here is that you kind of have to forge your own path. There's not like, oh, if you follow these accounts or if you do this, then you got it. I don't think it's like that, right? I mean, Jiajia, maybe you can speak more upon this, but I think everyone kind of just has to like play around with it and get a vibe.
Okay.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's about being who you are. And, I think there are little things that you can do so you don't look like you don't know what you're doing in this space. But ultimately, I always see social media as this performance of identity. We're all performing a persona, whether or not you truly live that or not. And I think it's somewhat easy to tell whether or not someone is being authentic. Again, because it is this social experience that comes from being human and having these shared values. We're playing out a performance essentially in the form of little squares, and eventually in the form of like 15-second videos. And I think that recognition of being, authentic and who you are is something that comes through naturally if you are just being you in the space.
And how do you guys think the nature of social media might evolve in the future? Kevin, you spoke about Web 3.0. We've spoken about NFTs and the metaverse. How will things change?
I think it's changing at a very accelerated pace. During Christmas, I asked my niece what she wanted for Christmas. I said, "Do you want, a toy, or what would you want?" And she wanted Roblox coins. So in that sense, I think the young generation, talking about like under 16 or I don't know, a very young generation are consuming more and more online, and they're forming more and more of an identity online through avatars, through being in this metaverse, that I think the future of it would really take place a lot online, and with the technology, VR, AR, holograms. I think that's where kind of the future is heading, where people would spend more and more time online. And because of COVID, for example, like we could be in a meeting room and maybe we would all be avatars, and then we would go do activities together, or go see a gallery, or maybe the museum. Michael's planning an online museum soon, so we could actually then just go visit his museum without actually traveling there. And I think that's where I feel that the future is heading.
A related question from one of the audience members. In the future, do you think people will still be collecting physical artworks?
I mean, I think so.
Yeah,
physical. Yeah. I think so. I mean, there's nothing
I
that
don't think
replaces.
NFT speaks to me that much compared to physical works.
Yeah, I agree.
Something really reductive I remember learning in an art history class was something a professor said to me about like made me realize like why do paintings exist? Paintings exist because there are walls. That is literally why paintings exist. And now that all of our experiences are on the screen, exactly what Kevin was saying, like people now want to collect objects in the digital space because this is where we're spending all of our time. We're in front of our computers, in front of our phones. So if we want to look at stuff, it's got to be digital. I think we will continue to dually live in the digital space in some way, and obviously as humans in the physical space. So, what's changing is just the way that we move around in spaces. And I think because people are naturally creative and appreciate exchange, culture, and objects that make us think about our lives and the meaning of our lives, it's just a natural progression of how the physical world has entered the metaverse, or whatever you want to call it.
And sorry, did you have something to add?
No, I think Jiajia is a really great speaker, and we could mute our mics so that she could just, break down everything, because I'm learning a lot from her perspective, and I think it's interesting.
Right. A question that I have for Jiajia or anyone is how we might continue to shape internet and digital culture and social media to be even more open or accessible platforms that facilitate, meaningful encounters with art that complement real world encounters with art.
I guess that's something that everyone is striving for. How do we take multidimensional experiences and nuance and put them through extremely simplified funnels? I think that's something that everyone, is challenged with every day when they're active and participating on a platform like social media. And I think specifically because there are these limitations, we've realized there's only so much you can do in this like more 2D environment. That's naturally how more virtual and immersive experiences have come about. I've always been a little bit cautious about 3D environments because I feel like we all kind of remember Second Life, right? This like video game environment, and the metaverse is sort of like upgraded, like maybe business class Second Life. So I feel like things have come and gone, and I don't know, I'm still a little bit hesitant about whether or not people will, live in those environments and interact in those environments. I think a lot of it probably has to do with the evolution of hardware, the fact that VR environments are not ubiquitous yet. I don't like having to put like a giant like thing on my face to be able to experience something online. But eventually, as we move towards technology that's more invisible, that's more comfortable and affordable, and something that most people can experience, even the gesture of like a mobile phone, like this object in your hand is not natural. So eventually like this will get smaller and smaller, maybe it'll be part of your body, but I think people are looking for ways of living in the way and interacting the way that you do in the physical world, given these limitations, especially, due to COVID and pandemic, not being able to have them in real life.
If there are no more comments, perhaps we can start our wrap up for the session. So we are approaching the time limit. All right, so Camilla, did you want to jump back in?
Yes. Thank you so much, Michael, Kevin, and Jiajia. That was a really inspiring talk with lots of things to learn from. And I think for me, just the insight of authenticity, of the power of your own opinion and have your own voice and be comfortable with that is a real takeaway. But thank you for sharing all that information, and thank you to Chloe from ArtAsiaPacific for moderating. There's nothing more for me to say other than thank you for joining C-Focus Spotlight this evening. There's more information on cfocus.sg, and there are plenty more talks to come, so please do look out for them and join us for our future sessions. Many thanks, everybody.